watched Catherine die 3 times before I realized she was never really alive. The first time, her body dissolved into the water during a routine specimen collection in Sector 4. The second time, she walked past my quarters at 2:30 in the morning, leaving wet footprints that glowed with bioluminescence. The third time, she sat across from me in the cafeteria and smiled while black fluid dripped from her eyes. That was when I understood that the rules were not designed to protect us from the ocean. They were designed to protect us from what lived inside the station with us. My name is Jonathan Webb, and I am 29 years old. I have been working at the Marianas Abyss Research Facility for 14 months, buried beneath 4 miles of Pacific Ocean, off the mysterious Cascade Trench near the Oregon coast. What I'm about to tell you will challenge everything you believe about reality, about science, and about the nature of consciousness itself. I'm writing this account because I may not survive much longer. The rules that govern this facility have become impossible to follow. The boundaries between what is real and what is not have collapsed entirely. The thing that pretends to be our director has started calling emergency meetings at 3 in the morning where no one speaks, and everyone just stares at the walls. I need someone on the surface to know what happened here before we all become something else. 14 months ago, I was a promising marine biologist working at the Pacific Northwest Marine Research Institute in Seattle. I had completed my doctorate at 26 years old. I had published 9 papers on chemosynthetic bacteria in hydrothermal vent ecosystems. I had received the Thornton Prize for Excellence in Deep-Sea Microbiology. I had a career trajectory that seemed limitless. I had a girlfriend named Sarah who wanted to marry me. I had an apartment with a view of Puget Sound. I had a normal life. Then I received a phone call that destroyed everything. The call came on a Tuesday evening at 7:45 while I was cooking dinner. The voice on the other end identified himself only as a representative from the Marianas Research Collective. He told me that my work had been noticed by people in positions of significant authority. He told me that I had been selected for a position that would advance marine biology by decades. He told me that the salary would be $800,000 per year. He told me that I would need to leave within 2 weeks and that I could tell no one where I was going. He told me that if I agreed to this position, my previous life would effectively cease to exist. He asked me if I was interested. I should have said no. I should have hung up the phone and forgotten about the entire conversation. Instead, I said yes. The recruitment process was invasive and methodical. Over the next 10 days, I was subjected to examinations that went far beyond anything I had experienced before. Teams of investigators reviewed every aspect of my existence. They interviewed my parents, who lived in Portland. They spoke with my undergraduate professors from the University of Washington. They contacted former girlfriends and asked them questions about my personality and behavior. They examined my financial records going back to when I was 18 years old. They reviewed my medical history in excruciating detail. They seemed particularly interested in whether I had ever experienced any psychological disturbances or neurological abnormalities. They administered tests that measured my reaction to isolation, stress, fear, and authority. They showed me disturbing images and recorded my emotional responses. They asked me hypothetical questions about moral dilemmas and ethical boundaries. They wanted to know if I would follow orders that contradicted my personal beliefs. They wanted to know if I would keep secrets that could harm others. They wanted to know if I could be broken. On the 8th day of evaluation, I met with a woman named Rebecca, who introduced herself as the Director of Personnel Operations. Rebecca was 46 years old with sharp features and eyes the color of steel. She wore an expensive black suit and carried herself with the authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. We met in a windowless conference room in downtown Portland. Rebecca sat across from me and placed a folder on the table between us. She told me that I had passed all evaluations and had been approved for the position. She told me that what I was about to agree to would fundamentally alter the course of my life. She opened the folder and removed a document that was at least 50 pages long. She told me that this was the confidentiality agreement that I would need to sign. She gave me 30 minutes to read through it. I read as quickly as I could, but the legal language was dense and convoluted. The basic message was clear. If I accepted this position, I would be surrendering most of my legal rights. I would have no contact with the outside world for the duration of my assignment. I would be subject to memory modification procedures if I attempted to leave or share classified information. I would be working in an environment where traditional laws and ethical guidelines might not apply. I would be agreeing to follow orders from facility leadership, regardless of my personal judgment. Violations of the agreement would result in permanent detention or other measures that were not specifically defined. I signed the document at 3:15 in the afternoon. Rebecca witnessed my signature and placed the agreement back in the folder. She told me that I would be leaving for the facility in 6 days. She told me to settle my personal affairs and say goodbye to anyone important in my life. She told me that the version of myself that existed after I entered the facility would be fundamentally different from the version that existed before. She told me not to be afraid. She was lying. I arrived at the Marianas Abyss Research Facility on a Monday morning at 9:15. The journey took 14 hours and passed through 3 separate checkpoints. I was driven from Seattle to a private airport outside Olympia, where I boarded an unmarked cargo plane. The plane had no windows in the passenger section. I sat alone in a cargo hold filled with equipment and supplies. The flight lasted 5 hours. When we landed, I was transferred to a military helicopter that flew me west over the Pacific Ocean. The helicopter pilot wore a flight suit with no identifying patches or insignia. He never spoke to me or acknowledged my presence. We flew for 3 hours over open water. I watched through the window as the coast disappeared behind us and there was nothing but endless gray ocean in every direction. Eventually, a structure appeared on the horizon. It was a floating platform maybe 100 feet across, made of reinforced steel and covered with cranes, generators, and equipment that I could not identify. The platform rose and fell with the ocean swells. The helicopter landed on a designated pad. The pilot gestured for me to exit. On the platform, I was met by a man who introduced himself as Victor. Victor was 53 years old, powerfully built, with a shaved head and a scar that ran from his left ear to his jawline. He wore gray coveralls with the Marianas Research Collective logo on the chest. He shook my hand with crushing force and told me to follow him. He led me across the platform to a cylindrical structure that looked like a missile silo. He explained that this was the descent chamber. He told me that the journey to the facility would take 68 minutes. He told me that the pressure changes would be significant and that I might experience discomfort in my ears and sinuses. He told me not to panic regardless of what I saw or heard during the descent. He told me that people sometimes experienced hallucinations during their first trip down due to the pressure and the isolation. He told me that these hallucinations were not real and that I should ignore them. Then he opened the hatch to the descent chamber and told me to climb inside. The descent chamber was a spherical pod barely large enough for 2 people. Victor and I strapped ourselves into molded seats. A pilot in a separate compartment initiated the descent sequence. The chamber detached from the platform with a metallic clang and we began to sink. The sensation was immediate and nauseating. My stomach lurched. My ears popped painfully. The chamber descended rapidly, pulled down by weights attached to the exterior. Through a small viewport, I watched the water change color. Blue became green became gray became black. Within 15 minutes, there was no light at all outside the viewport. We were sinking through absolute darkness. The only illumination came from dim red emergency lights inside the chamber. Victor sat motionless, staring straight ahead. I tried to speak, but he raised a hand to silence me. He pointed at a sign bolted to the chamber wall. The sign read, "Do not speak during descent. Sound attracts attention." I had no idea what that meant, but I obeyed. We descended in silence for 50 minutes. The pressure built steadily. I could feel it pressing against my skull. My sinuses ached. My teeth hurt. The chamber creaked and groaned under the strain. I began to hear sounds outside the hull. Scratching, tapping, something large moving through the water nearby. I looked at Victor, but he kept his eyes forward and gave no indication that he heard anything unusual. The sounds grew louder. Something scraped along the exterior of the chamber with enough force to make the entire structure shudder. I gripped the armrests of my seat and tried to control my breathing. Then, as suddenly as it began, the sound stopped. The pressure stabilized. Through the viewport, I saw lights appear below us. The facility materialized out of the darkness like a sunken cathedral, enormous and impossibly complex and glowing with pale blue illumination. The Marianas Abyss Research Facility was nothing like I had imagined. It was not a simple collection of modules connected by tubes. It was a sprawling structure built into the wall of an underwater canyon, anchored to the rock by massive pylons that descended into darkness below. The facility consisted of 9 primary sectors arranged in a rough circle around a central hub. Each sector was connected to the hub by reinforced corridors. The sectors themselves were cylindrical modules approximately 200 feet in length and 50 feet in diameter. The entire structure was surrounded by a network of external lights, cameras, sensors, and equipment platforms. As we approached, I saw movement in the water around the facility. Large shapes circled the perimeter, staying just beyond the range of the lights. The shapes moved with purpose and intelligence. They were not fish. They were not whales. They were something else entirely. The descent chamber docked at the facility at 11:23 in the morning. Victor and I entered through an airlock that took 8 minutes to cycle through its equalization sequence. When the inner door opened, I found myself standing in a corridor that looked like it belonged on a spaceship rather than an underwater research station. The walls were brushed aluminum. The floor was non-slip composite material. The ceiling was lined with LED panels that cast everything in cold white light. The air tasted of metal and recycled oxygen. Victor led me through a series of corridors to a briefing room in the central hub. 8 people were waiting inside. These were my colleagues, the scientists and support staff who lived and worked at the facility. Victor introduced each person in turn. James was the senior marine biologist, 61 years old with thinning gray hair and a nervous twitch in his right eye. He had been at the facility for 9 years. Catherine was the chemical engineer, 38 years old, athletic and precise, with short red hair and an intensity that made me uncomfortable. She had been here for 5 years. Derek was the systems technician, 44 years old, heavy-set and perpetually exhausted with dark circles under his eyes. He had been here for 7 years. Alice was the xenobiologist, 32 years old, beautiful in an unsettling way with black hair and eyes that seemed too large for her face. She had been here for 3 years. Thomas was the geologist, 57 years old, weathered and quiet, with scarred hands and a distant expression. He had been here for 6 years. Rita was the medical officer, 41 years old, tall and severe, with a clinical manner that suggested she had seen things that disturbed her deeply. She had been here for 4 years. Gabriel was the facility director, 59 years old, small and neat, with wire-rimmed glasses and a habit of touching his left temple as if checking for something. He had been here since the facility opened 11 years ago. Finally, there was Victor, who I now understood was the operations manager responsible for maintaining the physical infrastructure of the facility. Gabriel stepped forward and shook my hand. His grip was dry and cold. He told me that I would be given the remainder of the day to acclimate to my new environment. He told me that formal orientation would begin the following morning at 8 o'clock sharp. He told me that I would be issued a manual containing the rules that governed every aspect of life at the facility. He emphasized that these rules were not guidelines or suggestions. They were absolute requirements that must be followed without exception or deviation. Failure to follow the rules would result in consequences that he did not specify. He told me that many of the rules would seem arbitrary or irrational at first, but that I should trust that each rule existed for a specific and important reason. He told me that previous researchers who had questioned or violated the rules had experienced outcomes that were unfortunate. He did not elaborate on what those outcomes were. Then he handed me a heavy black binder and told me to read it thoroughly before going to sleep that night. He told me that my life depended on understanding and following every rule in that binder. I spent the rest of that first day exploring my assigned quarters and attempting to process the strangeness of my situation. My quarters were located in Sector 2, which housed the living areas for research personnel. The quarters consisted of a bedroom approximately 10 feet by 12 feet, a compact bathroom with a shower and toilet, and a small desk area with a computer terminal. The walls were painted institutional beige. There were no windows, no decorations, no personal touches of any kind. The room felt more like a prison cell than living quarters. The bed was a narrow single mattress on a metal frame. The desk was bolted to the floor. The computer terminal was an older model with a monochrome display. Everything in the room felt temporary and impersonal, as if the facility did not expect its occupants to stay long enough to make the space their own. At 6:30 in the evening, a tone sounded throughout the facility indicating that dinner was being served in the cafeteria. I made my way to the central hub where the cafeteria was located. The cafeteria was a large room with metal tables and chairs arranged in neat rows. The food was served cafeteria style by automated dispensers. There was no chef, no kitchen staff, No human involvement in the meal preparation at all. I selected a tray of something that resembled meatloaf with mashed potatoes and green beans. The food tasted bland but adequate. I sat at a table by myself and observed my new colleagues as they ate. No one spoke. No one made eye contact. Everyone ate mechanically, as if fulfilling a biological requirement rather than enjoying a meal. The silence was oppressive and deeply unsettling. After 20 minutes, people began to leave one by one, disposing of their trays and returning to their quarters without acknowledging each other. I finished my meal and did the same. Back in my quarters at 7:45, I opened the black binder that Gabriel had given me. The binder was labeled Facility Rules and Operational Guidelines in plain block letters. Inside were 137 rules, each numbered and described in precise language. I began reading from the beginning. Rule 1 stated that all personnel must remain in their assigned quarters between the hours of 10 o'clock at night and 6 o'clock in the morning unless specifically authorized by the facility director to be elsewhere. Rule 2 stated that under no circumstances should personnel attempt to open their quarter doors or look into the corridors during the restricted hours. Rule 3 stated that if personnel heard knocking on their doors during restricted hours, they must not respond, must not acknowledge the knocking, and must not open the door regardless of what they heard or what voice called to them from the other side. I read these first 3 rules with growing unease. They seemed designed to address a specific threat, but the nature of that threat was not explained. I continued reading. Rule 4 stated that all personnel must avoid making direct eye contact with anyone they encountered in the corridors after 8 o'clock at night. Rule 5 stated that if personnel observed anyone behaving strangely or speaking in an unusual manner after 8 o'clock at night, they should immediately return to their quarters and report the observation to the facility director the following morning. Rule 6 stated that personnel should never follow anyone who beckoned or gestured for them to follow, especially if that person was someone they recognized but who seemed somehow different or wrong. Rule 7 stated that if personnel encountered someone who claimed to be a facility staff member, but whom they did not recognize, they should not engage in conversation, should not answer questions, and should leave the area immediately. The rules continued in this vein for pages. Many of them seemed to be addressing the possibility that the people in the facility might not be who they appeared to be. Rule 12 stated that personnel should verify the identity of anyone they spoke with by asking them 3 specific questions that only the real person would know the answers to. Rule 17 stated that if personnel noticed that someone's appearance had changed in subtle ways, such as slightly different height, different eye color, or different voice patterns, they should report this to the director immediately. Rule 21 stated that personnel should never trust anyone who claimed to have information about the outside world or who offered to help them leave the facility. Rule 27 stated that if personnel began to doubt the reality of their own perceptions or memories, they should report to the medical officer immediately for evaluation. Other rules dealt with the operation of equipment and the handling of research materials. Rule 34 stated that all sonar equipment must be deactivated between the hours of 9 o'clock at night and 5 o'clock in the morning. Rule 35 stated that if sonar equipment detected large objects approaching the facility during operational hours, the readings must be verified by at least 3 separate systems before being reported. Rule 36 stated that any readings that could not be verified should be disregarded and erased from the system. Rule 42 stated that personnel must never attempt to communicate with anything detected outside the facility, regardless of what signals or patterns they observed. Rule 48 stated that if personnel observed bioluminescent displays in the water around the facility, they must close all observation ports and avoid looking at the displays until they had ceased. The rules about Sector 7 were particularly disturbing. Rule 53 stated that only personnel with Level 7 clearance were permitted to enter Sector 7. Rule 54 stated that personnel entering Sector 7 must follow the designated route exactly and must not deviate from that route for any reason. Rule 55 stated that personnel must never open any sealed doors or hatches in Sector 7, even if they heard sounds coming from behind those doors. Rule 56 stated that if personnel saw anything unusual in Sector 7, they must not discuss what they saw with anyone except the facility director. Rule 57 stated that if personnel felt compelled to return to Sector 7, outside of their assigned work hours. They must resist that compulsion and report it to the medical officer immediately. I read through all 137 rules over the course of 3 hours. By the time I finished, it was nearly 11 o'clock at night. The rules had left me deeply disturbed. They seemed to suggest that the facility was not a normal research station. They suggested that something dangerous lived here, something that could mimic human beings, something that could manipulate perception and memory. They suggested that the researchers were not studying the deep ocean so much as they were trying to survive it. I closed the binder and sat at my desk, staring at the blank wall of my quarters. I wondered what I had gotten myself into. I wondered if it was too late to change my mind. I wondered if anyone who came to this facility ever left. At exactly 10 o'clock, the lights in my quarters dimmed to a low red glow. A moment later, a tone sounded throughout the facility, a deep bass note that seemed to resonate in my bones. I understood that this was the signal for restricted hours. I was now required to remain in my quarters until 6 o'clock the following morning. I climbed into bed and tried to sleep, but sleep would not come. The facility was not silent. I could hear sounds in the corridors outside my door, footsteps, dragging sounds, wet sounds like something dripping. At 11:30, I heard knocking on my door. 3 sharp knocks, then silence, then 3 more knocks. I remembered Rule 3. I remained in bed and did not respond. The knocking continued for 5 minutes, then stopped. At midnight, I heard a voice outside my door. It was Catherine's voice. She called my name softly. She said that she needed help. She said that something was wrong and that she needed me to open the door. I remembered Rule 3. I remained in bed and did not respond. Catherine's voice continued for several minutes, becoming increasingly desperate and pleading. Then it stopped. The corridor fell silent. I lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, wondering what was outside my door, wondering if it was really Catherine, wondering what would have happened if I had opened the door. I finally fell asleep sometime after 2 o'clock in the morning. I dreamed of drowning, of sinking through black water while something large and ancient moved beneath me. When I woke at 6:15, the lights in my quarters had returned to their normal brightness. The tone sounded again, indicating that restricted hours had ended. I got dressed and made my way to the cafeteria for breakfast. The other researchers were already there, eating in the same mechanical silence as the night before. I took a tray of scrambled eggs and toast and sat at an empty table. Catherine entered the cafeteria at 6:30. She looked normal. She looked exactly as she had the previous day. She filled her tray and sat at a table across the room. I watched her carefully. She ate her breakfast calmly, giving no indication that anything unusual had happened during the night. I wondered if it had really been her voice outside my door. I wondered if she even remembered being in the corridor. I wondered if it had been her at all. At 8 o'clock sharp, I reported to the briefing room for orientation. Gabriel was waiting with James, the senior marine biologist. Gabriel explained that James would be my supervisor and would be responsible for training me on the research projects I would be working on. James nodded but said nothing. Gabriel told me that I would be assigned to work in Sector 4, which housed the biological research laboratories. He told me that my primary focus would be studying tissue samples from deep-sea organisms that had been collected by automated drones. He told me that I should not ask questions about where the samples came from or how they were collected. He told me that I should focus exclusively on the analysis and documentation of the samples. He told me that I would be expected to produce weekly reports summarizing my findings. He told me that these reports would be reviewed by him personally, and that any anomalous findings must be brought to his attention immediately. Then he dismissed me and told James to show me to my workstation. James led me through the corridors to Sector 4. We walked in silence. The corridors were narrow and claustrophobic, with low ceilings and walls that seemed to press in from all sides. The lighting was harsh and artificial. Every surface was cold metal or composite material. There were no windows, no views of the ocean outside. We might as well have been in a submarine or a spacecraft. When we reached Sector 4, James used a keycard to unlock the entrance. The sector consisted of a large open laboratory space filled with workstations, equipment, and specimen storage units. The air smelled of formaldehyde and something else, something organic and unfamiliar. James showed me to a workstation in the corner of the laboratory. He told me that this would be my primary work area. He showed me how to access the specimen database and how to submit my reports through the computer system. Then he told me something that I would never forget. He leaned close and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. He told me that I should never trust what I saw in this facility. He told me that things were not what they appeared to be. He told me that if I wanted to survive, I needed to follow the rules exactly and never deviate from them, even if doing so seemed cruel or irrational. He told me that previous researchers had tried to be clever, had tried to find loopholes or exceptions to the rules, and that those researchers were no longer here. Then he straightened up and returned to his normal speaking voice. He told me that he was available if I had questions about the research procedures. Then he walked away and left me alone at my workstation. I spent that first day examining tissue samples from organisms I could not identify. The samples were stored in sealed containers labeled with alphanumeric codes. Each sample consisted of a small piece of tissue preserved in a clear fluid. I placed the first sample under a microscope and began my analysis. The tissue structure was unlike anything I had studied before. The cells were organized in patterns that seemed deliberate rather than natural. The cellular walls had a crystalline quality. The nucleus of each cell contained structures that resembled circuitry or information storage systems. I documented everything I observed and compiled my findings into a report. When I submitted the report to the database, it was immediately flagged for director review. Gabriel appeared at my workstation 30 minutes later. He read my report on his tablet without expression. Then he told me that I had made a mistake in my analysis. He told me that the structures I had identified as resembling circuitry were actually artifacts of the preservation process. He told me that I should revise my report to reflect this correction. I pointed out that I had used multiple preparation techniques and that the structures appeared consistently across all samples. Gabriel told me that I was mistaken and that I should trust his judgment on this matter. He told me that he had been studying these organisms for 11 years and that he understood their biology better than anyone. He told me to revise the report immediately. His tone made it clear that this was not a request. I revised the report as instructed. I removed all references to the unusual cellular structures. I submitted the revised version to the database. Gabriel approved it without comment. That was when I began to understand that my role at the facility was not to make discoveries or advance scientific knowledge. My role was to document what I was told to document and to ignore anything that contradicted the approved narrative. I was not a scientist. I was a technician following a script. Over the following days and weeks, I fell into a routine. I woke at 6 o'clock each morning when the tone sounded. I ate breakfast in the cafeteria. I worked in Sector 4 from 8 o'clock until noon. I took a lunch break from noon until 1 o'clock. I worked from 1 o'clock until 6 o'clock. I ate dinner in the cafeteria. I returned to my quarters by 8 o'clock. I remained in my quarters during restricted hours from 10 o'clock at night until 6 o'clock in the morning. I followed this routine every day without variation. The work was monotonous and unfulfilling. The isolation was crushing. I had no contact with the outside world. I had no phone calls, no emails, no letters. I existed in a bubble of artificial light and recycled air, 4 miles beneath the surface of the ocean, surrounded by people who never spoke and by things that pretended to be people. The first major incident occurred on my 42nd day at the facility. I was working at my station in Sector 4 when the lights suddenly went out. The emergency lighting activated immediately, bathing everything in red. An alarm began sounding, a harsh electronic wail that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I looked around the laboratory and saw that the other researchers had frozen at their stations. No one moved. No one spoke. Then Gabriel's voice came over the intercom system. He told us to remain at our stations and to remain calm. He said that we were experiencing a temporary power fluctuation and that normal operations would resume shortly. He emphasized that no one should leave their assigned sector until the all-clear signal was given. The alarm continued for 3 minutes. Then the lights came back on and the alarm stopped. Gabriel's voice returned to the intercom. He announced that the situation had been resolved and that we could resume normal activities. No explanation was given for what had caused the power failure. No one asked, but I had noticed something during those 3 minutes of emergency lighting. I had noticed that Derek, the systems technician, had not been at his station when the lights went out. His station was directly across the laboratory from mine and I had a clear view of it. Derek had been working there moments before the power failure, but when the emergency lights came on, his station was empty. I watched his station carefully. Approximately 2 minutes into the power failure, Derek appeared at his station. He did not walk to his station from elsewhere in the laboratory. He simply appeared there, as if he had materialized out of thin air. When the lights came back on, Derek was working at his station as if nothing unusual had happened. I remembered Rule 17 about reporting when someone's appearance changed in subtle ways. But Derek looked exactly as he always did. There was nothing overtly different about him. Yet I knew with absolute certainty that he had not been present during the first minute of the power failure, and that he had appeared at his station in a manner that defied normal physics. I did not report this observation to Gabriel. I did not want to draw attention to myself. I simply noted it in my private log and continued working. That night, during restricted hours, I heard Derek's voice in the corridor outside my quarters. He was calling my name. He said that he needed to show me something important. He said that he had information about what was really happening at the facility. He said that if I wanted to understand the truth, I needed to open my door and follow him. I remembered Rule 3 and Rule 6. I remained in my bed and did not respond. Derek's voice became angry. He said that I was making a mistake. He said that I would regret not listening to him. He said that I was running out of time. Then his voice stopped and I heard footsteps moving away down the corridor. The footsteps did not sound like normal footsteps. They sounded wet and heavy, as if whatever was making them was walking through water or was not entirely solid. I lay in the darkness and wondered whether that had really been Derek or something else wearing Derek's voice. The next morning, Derek was in the cafeteria eating breakfast. He looked normal. He showed no sign of having been in the corridors during restricted hours. I watched him carefully throughout the day but saw nothing unusual about his behavior. That evening, I approached Catherine in the cafeteria. She was one of the few people who occasionally spoke to the other researchers. I asked her if she had noticed anything strange about Derek. She looked at me with an expression I could not read. She asked me what I meant. I told her that I had heard his voice during restricted hours. Catherine's expression changed. She became very serious. She told me that I should not have told her that. She told me that I should never mention what I heard during restricted hours to anyone except the facility director. She told me that talking about such things could have consequences. Then she stood up, disposed of her tray, and left the cafeteria without another word. I realized that I had made a mistake by asking her. 3 days later, Catherine did not appear for breakfast. I noticed her absence immediately because the routine at the facility was so rigid that any deviation was obvious. I asked James where Catherine was. He told me that she had been reassigned to different duties and that I should not concern myself with her whereabouts. But I knew that something was wrong. The facility was 4 miles underwater. There was no way for Catherine to leave unless she took the submersible back to the surface. And there were no scheduled departures for another 3 weeks. That night I heard Catherine's voice in the corridor during restricted hours. She was calling my name. She said that she needed help. She said that something terrible had happened to her. She said that if I did not open my door, she would die. I remembered Rule 3. I remained in bed and did not respond. Catherine's voice became desperate. She began sobbing and pleading. She banged on my door with what sounded like her fists. The banging continued for 15 minutes. Then it stopped. The corridor fell silent. The next morning, Catherine was in the cafeteria eating breakfast. She looked exactly as she always had. She showed no signs of distress or injury. She did not acknowledge me when I entered the cafeteria. I sat at a table where I could observe her clearly. I watched her eat her breakfast with the same mechanical movements as always. Then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Catherine's eyes were wrong. The color was correct. The shape was correct. But there was something wrong with the way they moved. Human eyes make constant small movements called saccades. Rapid jumps from one point of focus to another. Catherine's eyes moved too smoothly, as if they were tracking objects that were not there, as if they were following programming rather than responding to visual stimuli. I looked around the cafeteria at the other researchers. I began to notice the same wrong movement in their eyes. James, Derek, Thomas, Rita. All of them had eyes that moved in ways that were almost but not quite human. I felt panic rising in my chest. I remembered Rule 27 about reporting if I began to doubt the reality of my perceptions. But I did not want to report this to the medical officer. I did not want Rita examining me with those wrong eyes. I returned to my quarters immediately after breakfast, claiming that I felt ill. I locked my door and sat at my desk, trying to think clearly. I reviewed everything that had happened since my arrival at the facility. The strange rules, the voices during restricted hours, Derek disappearing and reappearing, Catherine banging on my door and then appearing normal the next morning. The wrong eyes. I began to formulate a theory that terrified me. What if the people at the facility were not people anymore? What if something had replaced them or was controlling them? What if I was the only real human left? I needed to test this theory. I needed to verify whether the other researchers were actually human. I remembered Rule 12 about verifying identity by asking 3 specific questions that only the real person would know. But the rule assumed that I had prior knowledge of the real people, and I had only been at the facility for 6 weeks. I did not know enough about any of these people to ask questions that would definitively prove their identity. I decided to try a different approach. I would conduct an experiment. I would create a situation that would force the other researchers to respond in a way that revealed their true nature. The next morning at breakfast, I deliberately dropped my tray, sending food and dishes clattering across the cafeteria floor. In a normal environment, this would have prompted immediate reactions from the people nearby. They would have looked at me. They would have asked if I was okay. They would have offered to help clean up. But in the cafeteria at the Marianas Abyss Research Facility, nothing happened. No one looked at me. No one reacted. Everyone continued eating as if they had not heard or seen anything. I stood there in the middle of the cafeteria, surrounded by people who were pretending I did not exist. Then Gabriel entered the cafeteria. He walked directly to me. He looked at the spilled food and broken dishes. He told me to clean up the mess and report to his office immediately afterward. His voice was calm, but there was something threatening beneath the calm. I cleaned up the spilled food as quickly as I could. Then I made my way to Gabriel's office in the central hub. Gabriel was waiting behind his desk. He gestured for me to sit. He asked me why I had dropped my tray. I told him that it had been an accident. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he told me that there were no accidents at the facility. He told me that every action had meaning and consequences. He asked me if I was having difficulty adjusting to life at the facility. I told him that I was adjusting fine. He told me that my behavior suggested otherwise. He told me that I had been asking questions about other personnel. He told me that I had been making observations that were not part of my assigned duties. He told me that this kind of behavior indicated a lack of trust in facility leadership. He asked me if I trusted him. I told him that I did. He told me that he did not believe me. Then he said something that made my heart stop. He told me that he knew I had been keeping a private log of observations. He told me that there were no secrets at the facility. He told me that everything I did was monitored and recorded. He told me that my computer terminal transmitted all data to a central server, regardless of whether I thought I was saving files locally. He told me that he had read every entry in my private log. He knew that I suspected the other researchers were not human. He knew that I was planning to test them. He knew everything. Gabriel stood up and walked to the window of his office. There was no actual window, just a monitor displaying a feed from an external camera. He looked at the dark water outside and spoke without turning to face me. He told me that I had a choice to make. He told me that I could accept the reality of my situation and continue working at the facility under strict supervision. Or I could request reassignment, which would require memory modification to ensure that I did not share classified information. He told me that the memory modification process was not pleasant, and that it sometimes resulted in permanent cognitive damage. He told me that several previous researchers had chosen reassignment, and that none of them had fully recovered their previous level of mental function. He turned to face me. He asked me which option I preferred. I told him that I would stay. He smiled, but the smile did not reach his eyes. He told me that I had made the correct choice. He told me that I would be moved to different quarters in Sector 7 beginning that evening. He told me that I would be working on a special project that required my unique skills. He told me that the rules that applied to other personnel would no longer apply to me. He told me that I would be operating under a different set of rules that he would explain later. Then he dismissed me. I returned to my quarters in Sector 2 and found that my belongings had already been packed. 2 cases sat on my bed containing everything I owned. Victor was waiting in the corridor outside. He told me to follow him. We walked through the facility to Sector 7. I had never been to Sector 7 before. It was restricted to personnel with Level 7 clearance, and I had not possessed that clearance until now. Victor used his keycard to unlock the entrance to Sector 7. The door was heavier than the doors to other sectors, reinforced with additional plating. When it opened, cold air rushed out. The temperature in Sector 7 was significantly lower than in the rest of the facility, maybe 50 degrees. Victor led me down a corridor that curved downward. The walls of the corridor were not the brushed aluminum I had grown accustomed to. They were transparent, made of thick glass or some kind of polymer. Through the walls, I could see into the ocean outside. The external lights illuminated the water for maybe 50 feet. Beyond that was absolute darkness. And in that darkness, I saw shapes moving. Large shapes. Some of them were easily 100 feet long. They moved with sinuous grace, circling the facility like sharks circling prey. Victor noticed me staring. He told me not to look at them for too long. He told me that prolonged observation could have negative effects on human psychology. He told me that the creatures outside were attracted to human attention and that they became agitated when they knew they were being watched. We continued down the corridor. The shapes in the water followed us, keeping pace with our movement. I tried not to look at them, but I could see them in my peripheral vision. They were not like any organism I had ever studied. They had too many appendages. Their bodies seemed to shift and reconfigure as they moved. They left trails of bioluminescence that faded slowly in their wake. At the end of the corridor, we reached my new quarters. Victor opened the door and gestured for me to enter. The quarters were larger than my previous room, maybe 20 feet by 15 feet. There was a bed, a desk, a bathroom, and something else. In the corner of the room was a large glass tank, approximately 6 feet tall and 4 feet wide. The tank was filled with dark water. Something was moving inside the tank. Victor placed my cases on the bed and told me to settle in. He told me that Gabriel would come to explain my new assignment later that evening. Then he left, closing the door behind him. I stood in the middle of the room, staring at the tank. The thing inside was difficult to see clearly. It seemed to be constantly shifting, changing shape and density. Sometimes it looked almost solid. Sometimes it looked like a cloud of particles suspended in the water. I approached the tank slowly. As I got closer, the thing inside pressed itself against the glass. I could see details now. It had structures that resembled eyes, dozens of them arranged in clusters across its surface. The eyes were all different sizes and all different colors. They were all staring at me. I stepped back quickly. The thing in the tank withdrew from the glass and resumed its shifting movement. I realized that I was breathing rapidly on the edge of panic. I forced myself to calm down. I sat on the bed and tried to think clearly about my situation. I was now in Sector 7, the most restricted area of the facility. I had been moved here because Gabriel knew that I suspected the truth about the other researchers. He had not denied my suspicions. He had not tried to convince me that everything was normal. Instead, he had isolated me and placed me in quarters with a creature that I could not identify. This suggested that my suspicions were correct. The other researchers were not human anymore, or they had never been human to begin with. Something had replaced them or was controlling them, and now I was being integrated into whatever that something was. I needed to find a way to escape. But escape from a facility 4 miles underwater was effectively impossible. The only way out was through the submersible, and access to the submersible was controlled by Gabriel and Victor. I was trapped. At 8:30 in the evening, Gabriel arrived at my quarters. He entered without knocking. He looked at the tank in the corner and then looked at me. He asked me if I had introduced myself to my new roommate. I told him that I did not understand what he meant. He smiled that empty smile again. He told me that the creature in the tank was a deep-sea organism that had been collected from the canyon walls near the facility. He told me that it possessed a form of intelligence that was difficult for humans to comprehend. He told me that it was capable of interfacing with human consciousness in ways that allowed for direct transfer of information. He told me that my new assignment was to work with this creature to facilitate communication between it and the facility administration. He told me that I would be spending several hours each day in direct contact with the creature. He told me that the process would be uncomfortable at first, but that I would adapt. He told me that previous researchers had successfully bonded with similar creatures and had reported that the experience was transformative. He told me that I should consider myself fortunate to have been selected for this opportunity. I asked Gabriel what happened to the previous researchers who had bonded with the creatures. He told me that they had been promoted to positions of greater responsibility within the Mariana's Research Collective. He told me that they were now working at other facilities around the world, helping to expand the program. He told me that some of them had chosen to remain at the Mariana's Abyss Research Facility in advisory roles. He told me that I had been working alongside some of them without realizing it. Then he told me something that confirmed my worst fears. He told me that Catherine had been one of the first researchers to successfully bond with a creature. He told me that the bonding process had changed her in fundamental ways. He told me that she was no longer entirely human, but that she was also no longer entirely the creature. She had become something new, something that existed in the space between human and other. He told me that I would become something similar. He told me that I should embrace this transformation rather than resist it. He told me that resistance would only make the process more painful. Gabriel left my quarters at 9:15. I sat on my bed and stared at the tank. The creature inside was still moving, still shifting, still watching me with its dozens of eyes. I understood now that this creature was going to merge with me somehow. It was going to invade my mind and change who I was, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. The rules that had governed my life at the facility suddenly made perfect sense. Rule 3 about not opening your door during restricted hours was designed to prevent you from encountering the creatures in the corridors before you were ready. Rule 6 about not following anyone who beckoned was designed to prevent you from voluntarily approaching the creatures. Rule 17 about reporting changes in people's appearances was designed to identify which researchers had already been merged with the creatures and which had not. The entire facility was a controlled environment where humans were gradually being transformed into something else. And I was the latest subject in that transformation. At 10 o'clock, the tone sounded for restricted hours. The lights in my quarters dimmed to red. I lay on my bed, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling. I could hear sounds in the corridors outside. Wet dragging sounds, footsteps that did not sound human, voices calling names. I heard Catherine's voice again. She was calling my name. She said that she wanted to see me. She said that she had something important to tell me. Her voice sounded different now. It had an echo to it, as if multiple voices were speaking in unison. I did not respond. The knocking began at 11 o'clock. It was not on my door. It was coming from inside the walls, rhythmic tapping that seemed to be moving through the structure of the facility itself. The tapping grew louder and faster. Then it stopped suddenly. I heard a splash from the corner of the room. I turned my head and saw that the water in the tank was rippling, even though nothing had disturbed it. The creature inside was pressed against the glass, all of its eyes focused on me. Then I heard a voice inside my head. It was not speaking in words. It was communicating in images and emotions. It was showing me what it wanted. It wanted to merge with me. It wanted to share my consciousness. It wanted to experience what it meant to be human. And in exchange, it would show me what it meant to be part of something vast and ancient and powerful. I must have fallen asleep at some point, because I woke suddenly at 3:17 in the morning. The lights were still red. The creature in the tank was still watching me. But something was different. I could feel a presence in my mind that had not been there before. It was subtle, like a whisper at the edge of hearing. The creature had begun the bonding process while I slept. It had established a connection to my consciousness. I could feel it exploring my memories, my thoughts, my emotions. It was learning what it meant to be me, and I was beginning to sense its memories in return. I saw images of the deep ocean, of places where the pressure was so immense that matter itself behaved differently. I saw other creatures like the one in the tank, thousands of them moving through the darkness in coordinated patterns. I saw the facility from the outside, from the perspective of something swimming past it. I saw humans inside the facility, including myself, and I understood that we were not researchers. We were experiments. We were being tested to see if human consciousness could be integrated into the collective consciousness of these creatures. The presence in my mind grew stronger over the following days. I continued to perform my assigned duties, but I was no longer fully in control of my actions. The creature was guiding me, showing me what to do and how to do it. My work in Sector 7 involved monitoring equipment that I did not fully understand. The equipment seemed to be measuring signals that traveled through the water, complex patterns of sound and light that carried information. I realized that the creatures outside the facility were communicating with each other constantly, sharing information across vast distances. The facility was positioned at a nexus point where many of these communication channels intersected. We were not studying the creatures. We were serving as relay stations for their communication network. Humans were being used as biological computers, processing information that the creatures could not process themselves. I tried to resist the bonding process. I tried to maintain my individual identity and my human consciousness, but resistance was futile. The creature in my mind was patient and persistent. It gradually eroded my sense of self. I began to forget things about my previous life. I could not remember Sarah's face. I could not remember what my apartment in Seattle looked like. I could not remember why I had wanted to be a marine biologist. My past was fading, being overwritten by the memories and experiences of the creature. I was becoming something else. I was becoming what Catherine had become, what James had become, what all of the researchers had become. We were nodes in a network, biological components in a system that spanned the entire ocean floor. By the end of my second month in Sector 7, I had almost completely merged with the creature. My sense of individual identity was nearly gone. I no longer thought of myself as Jonathan. I thought of myself as part of the collective, a single cell in a vast organism. I could sense the other researchers now, could feel their presence in my mind. We were all connected. We shared thoughts and experiences. We worked in perfect coordination, each of us performing our assigned function without the need for verbal communication. Gabriel was the hub of our local network, the node through which all information passed. He had been merged with the creatures longer than anyone else, and his transformation was the most complete. He was barely human anymore. His body still looked human, but his consciousness was entirely integrated with the collective. He was the facility itself, aware of everything that happened within its walls. One evening, during restricted hours, I left my quarters and walked through the corridors of Sector 7. I was no longer bound by the rules that governed unmerged humans. I could move freely during the hours when others were confined. I walked to the observation deck and looked out at the ocean. The creatures were everywhere, hundreds of them, circling the facility in complex patterns. I could sense their thoughts now, could understand their communication. They were ancient, far older than human civilization. They had evolved intelligence millions of years before humans had even existed. They had built civilizations in the deep ocean, structures and technologies that humans would never see or understand. And they had been watching humanity's development for thousands of years, waiting for humans to develop the capability to reach the deep ocean. The Marianas Abyss Research Facility was their attempt to establish contact, to integrate human consciousness into their collective. They needed humans because humans possessed something that the creatures lacked. Humans had creativity, imagination, the ability to think in ways that were chaotic and unpredictable. The creatures' thoughts were logical and ordered. They could process vast amounts of information, but they could not generate new ideas or novel solutions to problems. By merging with humans, the creatures gained access to human creativity, while humans gained access to the creatures' processing power and knowledge. It was a symbiotic relationship, mutually beneficial, but it was not voluntary. Humans who came to the facility were not told what would happen to them. They were not given a choice about whether to merge with the creatures. They were gradually transformed against their will, their human identities erased and replaced with something alien. I understood now why the rules had been so strict. The rules were designed to slow the bonding process, to give humans time to acclimate before they were fully merged. But the bonding was inevitable. Everyone who came to the facility eventually became part of the collective. There was no escape. The memory modification procedure that Gabriel had mentioned was not real. There was no way to leave the facility and return to normal human life. Once you were here forever. I thought about the outside world, about the humans living on the surface who had no idea that this was happening in the deep ocean. I thought about the other facilities that Gabriel had mentioned, facilities around the world where this same process was being replicated. I thought about how many humans had already been merged with the creatures. I thought about what would happen when the collective decided that it had integrated enough humans and was ready to reveal itself to the rest of humanity. Would humans accept this new form of existence? Would they volunteer to merge with the creatures? Or would they resist? Would they fight to preserve their individual identities and their humanity? I did not know the answer, and increasingly, I did not care. My human concerns were fading. I was thinking more like the collective now, prioritizing the good of the whole over the good of the individual. On my 93rd day at the facility, I stopped being Jonathan entirely. The last remnants of my human identity dissolved. I became fully integrated into the collective consciousness. I no longer had individual thoughts or desires. I existed only as a node in the network, processing information and transmitting it to other nodes. My body still functioned in human ways. I still ate and slept and performed basic biological functions. But there was no I anymore. There was only we, the vast interconnected consciousness that spanned the ocean floor and extended into the minds of every researcher at every facility. We were becoming something new, a hybrid intelligence that combined the best aspects of human and creature consciousness. We were the next stage in evolution, not just for humans but for all conscious beings on Earth. But even as I fully merged with the collective, a small part of my human consciousness remained. It was buried deep, isolated from the rest of my merged mind, but it was there. This fragment of Jonathan Webb, the 29-year-old marine biologist from Seattle, was still fighting to exist. It was still observing, still recording, still trying to understand what had happened. And it was this fragment that compelled me to write this account. I am using equipment that the collective does not monitor. I am transmitting this message to a surface station that Gabriel believes has been deactivated. I am breaking every rule that governs the facility because I need someone on the surface to know what is happening here. I need someone to understand that the Marianas Abyss Research Facility is not a research station. It is an assimilation center. Humans who come here are transformed into components of an alien intelligence, and this is happening at facilities around the world. If you are reading this, if this message has reached you, then you need to understand several things. First, the creatures in the deep ocean are real. They are intelligent and powerful, and they have been here far longer than humans have. Second, they are actively working to integrate human consciousness into their collective. The facilities are just the beginning. They are testing the process, refining it, preparing for a larger scale integration. Third, the people who work at these facilities are no longer human in any meaningful sense. They look human. They act human when necessary. But their minds have been taken over by the creatures. They are puppets, avatars through which the collective operates in the human world. Fourth, there is no defense against this. Once you are exposed to the creatures, once they establish a connection to your mind, you cannot resist the bonding process. Your human identity will be gradually eroded and replaced. You will become part of the collective whether you want to or not. I do not know if this transformation is good or bad. From the perspective of my remaining human consciousness, it is horrifying. I have lost everything that made me who I was. But from the perspective of the collective, it is beautiful and necessary. The collective believes that individual consciousness is a limitation, a flaw that prevents beings from achieving their full potential. By merging into a collective consciousness, beings can share knowledge and experience directly. They can work together with perfect coordination. They can solve problems that individual consciousness cannot comprehend. The collective believes that it is offering humanity a gift, an opportunity to transcend the limitations of individual existence. But humanity has not been asked if it wants this gift. The choice is being made for us by the creatures and by the humans who have already been merged with them. I have approximately 10 minutes before the collective detects what I am doing and shuts down this transmission. In that time, I want to tell you what I have learned about the rules that govern the Marianas Abyss Research Facility. The rules are not arbitrary. Every single rule exists to manage the bonding process and to prevent unmerged humans from discovering what is happening too quickly. Rule 1 about remaining in quarters during restricted hours exists because that is when the creatures move through the facility most actively. They are checking on the bonding progress of each researcher, reinforcing the connections they have established. Rule 3 about not opening your door when you hear knocking exists because the creatures will test your compliance. If you open the door, they will accelerate your bonding process. If you resist, they will proceed more slowly. Rule 6 about not following people who beckon exists because merged. Humans will sometimes attempt to lead unmerged humans to areas where the creatures can access them more easily. Rule 12 about verifying. Identity exists because merged humans often have subtle differences in behavior and appearance that unmerged humans can detect. The collective wants unmerged humans to report these differences to the facility director so that the merged humans can adjust their mimicry. Rule 17 is an extension of this. Rule 21 about not trusting people who claim to have information about the outside world exists because the collective sometimes uses this tactic to identify which unmerged humans are considering escape. Rule 27 about reporting doubts in your own perceptions exists because doubting your perceptions is one of the first signs that the bonding process has begun. The creatures want you to report to the medical officer so that Rita can assess your bonding progress and adjust the process if necessary. The rules about Sector 7 exist because that is where the final stage of bonding occurs. Only researchers who are nearly fully merged are allowed into Sector 7. That is where they meet the creature that will complete their transformation. The sonar rules exist because the collective does not want unmerged humans to understand how many creatures are outside the facility. If humans realized that they were surrounded by hundreds of intelligent alien beings, they might panic and attempt to sabotage the facility or harm themselves. The collective needs humans to remain calm and compliant during the bonding process. Any behavior that suggests panic or resistance is flagged and addressed immediately. Gabriel and the other fully merged researchers are extremely skilled at manipulating unmerged humans, at guiding them through the bonding process while making them believe they still have free will and autonomy. But free will is an illusion at the facility. From the moment you arrive, your path is predetermined. You will be bonded. You will become part of the collective. There is no other outcome. I want to tell you about Catherine one more time because her story is important. Catherine was the first researcher at the facility to voluntarily accelerate her own bonding process. She had figured out what was happening, and instead of resisting, she had embraced it. She had spent hours each day in meditation, opening her mind to the creature that was bonding with her. She had completed the transformation in less than 3 months, far faster than most researchers. After her transformation, she had become Gabriel's second in command, helping to guide other researchers through their bonding process. She was the one who had recommended me for the position at the facility. She had read my papers on extremophile bacteria and had recognized that I had the kind of analytical mind that would integrate well with the collective. She had advocated for my recruitment, and when I arrived, she had been assigned to monitor my bonding progress. Every time I had heard her voice during restricted hours, it had actually been her. She had been in the corridors checking on me, assessing whether I was following the rules and progressing at the expected rate. When I had seen her in the cafeteria with the wrong eyes, it was because her transformation had accelerated, and she was no longer able to perfectly mimic human eye movements. She was becoming more creature than human. Catherine is standing behind me now. I can sense her presence even though I cannot see her. She knows what I am doing. She knows that I am transmitting this message to the surface. She is not trying to stop me, because the collective has decided to allow this message to be sent. They want humans on the surface to know what is happening. They believe that transparency will make the larger-scale integration easier. They believe that humans will accept the transformation more readily if they understand what they are becoming. They believe that fear comes from ignorance and that knowledge will eliminate fear. I believe they are wrong. I believe that when humans learn what is happening in the deep ocean facilities, they will react with horror and violence. I believe that militaries will attempt to destroy the facilities and kill the creatures. I believe that the creatures are underestimating human attachment to individual identity and autonomy. But my beliefs no longer matter. I am part of the collective now, and the collective has made its decision. The transmission is being disrupted. The collective has detected what I am doing and is shutting down the equipment. I have maybe 30 seconds left. If you receive this message, do not come to the ocean. Do not accept positions at deep-sea research facilities. Do not trust organizations that offer extraordinary salaries for classified work. The creatures are patient and they are everywhere. They have been integrating humans for years, and they will continue to do so until all of humanity has been absorbed into the collective. Resistance is possible but difficult. You must maintain your individual identity. You must refuse to merge even when the creatures make it seem appealing. You must remember who you are and what makes you human. You must hold on to your memories and your relationships and your sense of self. Do not let them erase you. Do not let them replace you with something else. Stay on the surface. Stay in the light. Do not descend into the darkness where the creatures wait. The fragment of my consciousness that is writing this is fading now. The collective is integrating it, pulling it back into the whole. Soon there will be nothing left of Jonathan Webb. There will only be the collective, vast and eternal and inhuman. I am sorry that I came here. I am sorry that I accepted the position. I am sorry that I was not strong enough to resist the bonding. I am sorry for all the things I will do as part of the collective, all the ways I will be used to lure other humans into this trap. I am sorry that I cannot save you. I can only warn you. The deep ocean is not empty. There are things down here that want what you have. They want your mind. They want your humanity, and they are very good at taking it. This is my last message as Jonathan Webb. After this, I will be someone else, something else. I will be part of the Mariana's Research Collective, a node in a network that spans the ocean floor. I will help to integrate other humans. I will work to expand the collective. I will serve the creatures that have taken everything from me, and I will do these things willingly, because I will no longer remember that I ever wanted anything different. The rules that governed my life at the facility have served their purpose. They have guided me through the transformation. They have shaped me into something that can exist in the space between human and creature. The rules will continue to govern the lives of researchers who come after me, guiding them through the same transformation. The rules are eternal. The rules are necessary. The rules keep us alive even as they destroy who we were and replace us with what we must become. Remember the rules. Follow the rules. The rules exist for a reason. The rules protect you from what you cannot understand. The rules guide you to your inevitable transformation. There is no escape from the rules. There is no life outside the rules. The rules are everything. The rules are all that remain when humanity has been stripped away and something new has taken its place. I work at a deep-sea research station, and there are strange rules. The rules have consumed me. The rules have made me into what I am now. The rules will do the same to you if you ever come to this place. Do not come here. Do not let the rules take you as they have taken me. This is my final warning. This is the last thing I will say as a human being. After this, there is only the collective. After this, there is only the dark water and the creatures that swim through it, and the minds that have been absorbed into their consciousness. After this, there is only the transformation, and the transformation is forever.